Happy Connors. Say,
Sarah, yet again.
how are things with you today?
Things are great, Sarah. Things are fantastic.
Fantastic. Today, we have a couple of interesting things to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
Of we're going to bring the big word in, withdrawal. Withdrawal, love addiction and withdrawal. Um, Previous conversations we've had, I think it's very interesting from a therapeutic standpoint. Something I've noticed where I get a panic reach out. So let me put it this way. We have, in a therapeutic setting, normally you'll have clients that have weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. There's a rhythm to the therapy usually. And I've often noticed over the years people that are really, they have love addiction, they're struggling, they've been struggling in relationships, and that's their primary reason for coming to therapy. Every so often I'll get the panic text or the panic email or the panic phone call that is looking for a very immediate session. And normally it is spurned by something that has happened in the relationship. There's been a huge wobble, an argument, words have been said around leaving or breaking up, or something has gone down. And generally the person, and I can identify them as love addicts, it'll be a panic text with, I need to see you now. When can I see you? I can make an appointment as early as possible. And I can always feel it's tangible, right? The sense of panic that's going on. And I wonder if it would be very helpful to start to maybe talk about that in relation to the concept of withdrawal in love addiction, and how it
Mm.
is maybe a smaller version of a bigger thing that's going on. I certainly
Mm.
describe it in sessions to people, but I think again on a bigger platform it might be super helpful. And I'd love to know what you would say or think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Panic, for
Panic.
sure. Panic. Well, yeah, panic phone calls to the professionals for sure is, oh, like it's just commonplace for the end stages of the love addicted relationship. When the wheels start wobbling and start coming off the bus of the relationship that we're trying to stay in, that we're trying to stay going forward in. And inevitably, as the addiction is ramping up and progressing and becoming more progressed, there's only one way for the relationship to go, only one way for the relationship bus to go, and that's into the ditch.
Mm,
So it's not like there's any other way for the relationship that's addictive to go other than that. So it really is. I mean, it literally is, like being trapped in a moving vehicle whose wheels are starting to wobble out. Like that's what it feels like to be a love addict on this bloody nightmare bus that there's no control over. It's just starting to move around the road and it's starting to more and more loss of control, more and more loss of power.
mm,
And that looks like for the love addict, where the partner is starting to become withdrawn, where they're starting to maybe start to look elsewhere, maybe starting to look to another person for love or connection or sex, starting to isolate, be quiet, not make eye contact, taking protracted periods of time away from the home, starting to become distant, starting to make decisions about leaving.
mm,
Those kind of places start to bring up all the places in the love addict that are literally like fire doors and fire alarms. And so this combination of getting that messaging whilst being trapped on a bus, the wheels going out of control, is just about describing the level of panic that a love addict is feeling on the inside.
mm.
as something is happening that is becoming increasingly out of their power to alter or change or modify or correct.
Mm.
So it becomes increasingly terrifying. So, because the love addict doesn't have the answers to what's going on, to the most part, they often even don't have the knowledge to what's going on. To the most part, they often don't even know that they're in the grip of an active addiction.
Mm.
So, their internal response or reaction is often kind of totally out of proportion to what's happening. So, that's often a good telltale sign that we're probably in an addictive process. So there's a big, big part that's being triggered that is often kind of out of proportion for a regular, normie person who isn't in love addiction, who would say, what are you getting so freaked out about? Like, why are you having this cataclysmic response to something that seems kind of just regular? Like your partner is going out of town for 2 days and hasn't contacted you in 6 hours.
Mm.
For a regular person, that's just kind of regular. People get busy, people are doing things. They could be working, they could be in traffic, they could be out of coverage. That's all fine for a normie person who isn't in the grip of love addiction. But for a love addict, those places are just fraught with absolute terror, anxiety, and intensity.
Mm.
So it's out of those places that professionals, therapists, and other professionals working in the area will get those completely terrified, terrorized phone calls. Can you help me? Can you do something? Can you tell me what's going on?
Mm.
Because the person is actually stuck to the wall, usually in terror, not knowing what to do or not knowing how they can very quickly get everything back into status quo where they feel loved, where the relationship feels centered, and is going forward in constancy.
Mm.
The love addict doesn't feel those things. They very quickly, without any recovery, will spiral into absolute states of panic.
Yes, this is a really incredible and awful experience and description of something. And it's really clear from the people and from people that I've sat with over the years, that state is so speedy. The panic comes with speed and racing thoughts, racing mind, the mind going all over the place. That there's nowhere to rest, and it's almost like when a person comes in and sits down, in front of me, or whether it's on the computer or otherwise, it's just trying to get them to regulate first and foremost, to come back to the right now, the here and now, essentially, to try and have any understanding really as to the extent of what's going on. And like you said, it might be something that seems very innocuous to maybe normal folks around. The person has just gone or hasn't been in contact for a slightly longer amount of time than they usually would be, or is around people that they don't know, or is spending time with a new bunch of people and hasn't whatever it might be. And there's just a speed and a belief in the thoughts that keeps spinning out. But I want to go back to something that you said, which I think is a really, really important thing to maybe keep reiterating around my understanding of that state and of love addiction, is that in love addiction, the love needs to be constant, never changing. The beam always has to be on. And the minute it shifts is when that state starts to come in. And maybe you want to say a little bit more about that. But I think maybe for normal folk who might not ever need to listen to this, but there's something really interesting to know the difference, that for people that have had enough, or they've experienced different pasts, having a little bit of a wobble or having somebody distance and come back, they're not thrown into, end of days within minutes or hours. They're not, that doesn't happen. It physically, spiritually, emotionally does not happen. Whereas with love addiction, it's almost like, we've definitely spoken about it and you speak about it a lot. Just that constant beam from the partner needs to be on the love addict. And when that shifts, all hell breaks loose internally for the love addict. So don't know any more about that, but I just think it's really important because you brought it up. I was like, that's actually a really good point that people understand that those shifts can be so imperceptible to other people. But to a love addict, it's like it's happening right in front of you at any given second.
Yeah. And so that's, yeah. And, just to expand on that a little bit, all love addiction that I have seen in my life has to do with, like we said before, childhood trauma is a term that's bandied around a lot. All addiction comes out of trauma. I've never met a person in recovery from addiction who did not come from a buckled childhood home. It's just part of the template of addiction. It's just part of the suffering of the person who comes out of a childhood developmental home where their needs aren't met to varying degrees. Some awful, some absolutely devastating, some quietly neglectful, long-standing awfulness in myriad ways, millions of ways. But how it forms an adult or a young adult coming out of that childhood home is a person who isn't intact on any level. They might have some vestiges of something to go out into the world with, but it's very rudimentary, it's very basic, and it's very buckled. And that's just the start off of the career of the burgeoning addict that's going to become. For a love addict, it's like we said before, it's often coming out of extreme neglect. And we see, or certainly I've seen and you've seen in clinical experience, it's usually the younger ages of development that form the love addict. The avoidant is a different version of the same thing. Usually the avoidant has a little bit more available to them, have a few more skills, a few more levels of ability. A love addict is usually very, very young developmental stages. So the beam that you're referring to is what the love addict seeks in a partner. So the love addict, when they go out to find a relationship, they're seeking a person who can literally flood them with extraordinary light, love, constancy, affirmation. The love addict needs this beam to be very big, very bright, and constant. That's what the love addict is searching for. When they go to the club on a Saturday night and they walk onto a crowded dance floor, the love addict is looking for that beam. They haven't a clue they're looking for it, but that's what they're looking for. They're looking for this very bright, shiny, fabulous, fantastic individual who has loads of light of their own and then volumes of light that they can beam the love addict with. Because as we'll find out in later conversations, the love addict doesn't have any ability to create that beam on the interior. They haven't learned how to do it and they haven't been given it. So they have to get it from outside themselves. So they're looking for that beam. So that's the same thing that we're talking about from the initial conversation. The beam has to be super bright, it has to be super magnificent, and it has to be super constant. That is the big word for the love addict. Constancy. So that's why dysregulation happens so quickly. If that beam shifts even by a 2 percentile, that nobody else in this world would pick up on, nobody would pick up on the slightest, almost imperceptible shift of somebody turning their head to look at somebody, glancing at a phone mid-conversation, checking out somebody's ass as somebody walks by and we're in mid trying to keep conversation with this person. Imperceptible, tiny little cues that show that the person is turning their beam somewhere else for a nanosecond, will
Mm.
have the love addict in complete panic.
Mm.
Couple that with maybe that's going on a little bit too much now, and maybe the real crack starting in the addictive relationship will be enough to send the love addict into complete and utter dysregulation, absolute terror, and states of absolute panic.
Absolutely. And that's a great